Welcome. So in this video, we're going to continue a theme that we've begun on in our course on medical ethics, and this is the theme of the ethical questions that emerge in the context of reproductive health care. So we've already looked at opposing views on the morality of abortion, but we've also spent some time looking at the extent to which conscientious objection to certain procedures can be accommodated by looking at a position paper by ACOG. This time around, we're going to note a particular policy that is applied to IVF, that is in vitro fertilization, and other assisted reproductive technologies. And we're going to show how that sort of policy raises really interesting philosophical questions. So in order to do that, we're going to look at a chapter from Dunn and Hope called People Who Don't Exist, At Least Not Yet. So here's the plan. I want to consider a policy for IVF treatment. We'll consider some cases, and then I will show how the non-identity problem emerges for these cases. The non-identity problem is a famous philosophical puzzle made famous by the philosopher Derek Parfit in the 1980s. And as we'll see, when it comes to something like assisted reproduction, it's a very applicable practical problem. So let's start with a case. We might call this a sensationalized case. Dunn and Hope, the authors of our brief textbook, they are British, and this is a case that emerged in the British press. It involved a woman. She was 59 years old, and she wanted to become a mother. And while she was not able to receive the treatment she was asking for in the United Kingdom, she was able to go to a private clinic in Italy to get assisted reproductive technologies. Now, this woman eventually did become pregnant, and she gave birth to twins. Now, we can ask, was it wrong for her to seek this treatment? We could also ask, was it wrong for healthcare providers to help her conceive? We might start to ask the question, why or why not? Now, some people that I've talked to about this case say, nothing wrong happened here, right? If this is the choice that this woman wants to make, she should go ahead and make it, and nobody should stop her, much less criticize her for her choice to become a mother using assisted reproductive technologies. Although, Dunn and Hope will point out, this was a sensationalistic story, and in the British press, it seems that a common refrain was, this is a terrible thing to do. It seems to be very inconsiderate of the well-being of this woman's future children. So it's been pointed out, for instance, that, for instance, these children might become children without parents earlier in their lives, right? Although some people lose their parents at a young age, hopefully you are well into adulthood when you no longer have parents in this world. At 59, we could probably expect that this would happen early in the children's adulthood. We might also notice that certain hardships might come along with this. The children might be made fun of at school or something like that for having a very comparatively old mom. Maybe these kids would hear some pretty rough, "your mom is so old" jokes, right? These things taken into consideration, Dunn and Hope are going to find this kind of common explanation to be misplaced. And it's not simply on the grounds that everybody has a right to make their own decisions about risks and hardships that they're willing to take on for themselves and maybe even their children. But instead, Dunn and Hope think that there's something actually philosophically confused about telling this woman that she should not become a parent in order to protect the well-being of her possible children. Now let's go into this a bit more. Dunn and Hope flag some IVF treatment policies, and they look at the UK Fertilization and Embryology Act. Here's one thing that the policy says. It says that there's a duty for a clinic to consider the welfare of any child who may be born as the result of treatment, including the need of that child for supportive parenting. And in a 1990 version of this act, it also included the phrase, including the need of that child for a father. Now, there was debate, and 18 years after that policy was implemented, they decided to remove this claim that a child needs both a mother and a father. So the updated version was more accepting of the possibility of same-sex couples parenting a child, or the possibility of single mothers parenting a child. So, what we see here in this policy is that it basically says, well, if we're going to figure out whether we're sufficiently caring for the well-being of a child born via IVF, this is what's said. A couple must, in the ordinary course of events, satisfy the general criteria established by adoption societies in assessing suitability for adoption. So the thought would be, if you are found to be a good enough parent to adopt a child, then that's the bar we're going to use to determine whether you are a good enough parent, good enough potential parent, I should say, to have a child via IVF. But Dunn and Hope note that there might be a disanalogy. So let's look at the case of adoption first. So in this case of adoption that Dunn and Hope give us, we have 4 couples. So the capital letters represent couples. There's couple A, B, C, and D. And let's say couples A, B, C, and D have been ranked according to how suitable they would be to be adoptive parents. So think about the dimensions that might be considered in determining whether somebody's going to be a good parent or not. And this might mean a number of different things. It might mean whether or not this person has a clean criminal record, whether or not the couple has access to financial resources or has flexibility in their schedules to care for a child, is emotionally well themselves. Now, let's assume that we can rank couples in this way, and adoption agencies do this. We might find that couple A is better than couple B by a little bit, but in every dimension. And that's also true of couple B over couple C. They're better than couple C by a little bit in every dimension. And couple C is better than couple D by a little bit in every dimension. Now, let's say we have a baby. We'll call this baby X. Lowercase x will be our representation for this baby. If we rank all of these couples in terms of their suitability to be parents, we might say, look, it might be unfair in some senses. Maybe couple D came up in harder circumstances. But if we're focused mainly on the welfare of baby X, we might say there's a case to be made that couple A should get baby X, and that couple B, C, and D, we should tell, well, you look like you would be good parents. You're not the best among our candidates. And because of this, we're sorry to inform you that you will not be able to adopt. So that's the first scenario. That's sort of like how the standards of adoption work. That the Fertilization and Embryology Act is using as a guide. But consider this. Imagine we have couples A, B, C, and D again. And this time we're not asking the question of who gets baby X. Rather, we're asking who is going to get help with assisted reproduction. Right? So again, couple A are likely to be better parents than couples B, C, and D, so forth. But here's the thing. If we help couple A reproduce, they will give birth to one baby, and we can call this baby A, lowercase a. And if we help couple B, that will help baby B, lowercase b, and so forth, right? C to C, D to D. Now, here's the point. If we help couple B, baby B will be born, but if we help couple A, baby A will be born. And we can't say this. We can't say that if we're only going to help one couple, we're doing babies B, C, or D any favors by only giving assisted reproductive help to couple A, right? It is good for baby A, but it does no good for babies B, C, or D. So here's the point that Dunn and Hope give. I'm going to say for assisted reproduction, the question shouldn't be which set of parents is going to make a future baby best off. Instead, the question should be, are the baby's interests better served if she is born to these parents or if she never exists at all? Now, even if couple D is not as likely to do as well parenting their child as couple A, it's still plausible to think that a baby who's born to a couple who wants a baby and who is ready to care for it, we might say that baby is going to have a life worth living. Now, we could sort of take into consideration the fact that maybe we can only help 2 or 3 of the couples, or maybe only 1. And maybe we would say, on an all things considered judgment, we're still only going to help couple A. But what we should note is that we're not doing hypothetical babies B, C, or D any favors by not bringing them into existence. And it might be the case that if we have enough resources and enough time to help all the couples, if baby D could live a life worth living, we should bring baby D into existence as well. Now, let's consider another scenario and think about how, again, the adoption case is quite different from the assisted reproduction case. Now, this isn't about adoption. This is also about using reproductive technologies. So here's a first case. We have a couple, and this couple has a genetic condition that causes deafness. And this couple wishes to have a child who is also deaf. This is so that the child can be a full member of the deaf community, which is something that's brought a lot of value to the lives of each member of the couple. Now, the woman becomes pregnant, and genetic testing shows that the fetus does not have the gene causing deafness that the parents have. So this baby is likely to be a normal hearing baby. Now, suppose that there's a drug available, and if a person takes this drug while they are pregnant, that will cause a hearing fetus to become deaf. It has no other effect and is safe for the embryo and the mother. And the couple decide that the woman should take the drug in order to ensure that they have a child born deaf into the deaf community. Now, we can ask some questions about this case. Would it be morally wrong for the couple to choose to take this drug? Or would it be wrong to prescribe the drug at the couple's request? And in discussing this case with a number of people, many have told me that they think that there's something wrong here. If you have a potential person and you have the opportunity to give them a disability, well, you shouldn't take an ability away from that person. In fact, we're sort of like taking a choice away from this baby by making it deaf. We could look at C, right? If the parents did take the drug and their child were born deaf, would the child have a morally legitimate grievance against the parents or the doctors? And many would say yes. We could imagine a scenario in which, upon learning what the parents and the doctors did, maybe in adulthood, this child, now full grown, would decide to sue the parents and the doctor for taking away their ability to hear. That's one way this might go. But now let's consider a second case. It's very similar in many ways to the first case. Now I'll flag, we have a distinction that we should note. Dunn and Hope will call this first case, where the embryo is deafened, we can call this an identity-preserving action. Now, hold on and we'll see how it contrasts with the next case. This is going to be an example of an identity-affecting action. So here's a case that's very much like the first case, but with a difference. So we've got a couple, and they need help conceiving, and a number of embryos are created using IVF. And these embryos are genetically tested to see which embryo has the deafness gene. Right. Now, they produce two embryos in the case, embryo A and embryo B. Embryo A would develop into a hearing child normally, but embryo B would be born deaf, but otherwise would be healthy. And the couple, again, being deaf and hoping to have a child who can be part of the deaf community, they choose to implant embryo B and give birth to a deaf child. Now, if you consider an embryo to be a person with rights, and it makes you uncomfortable to think of the idea of discarding embryo A, just imagine that the deafness gene is completely held by the mother, and that they can simply test each of her eggs and only fertilize one egg at a time. And they just wait until they find an egg with the gene, fertilize that one, and implant it. All right. Now, we can ask the question, would it be wrong for the couple to choose the deaf embryo B instead of A? And would the doctors be acting wrongly to do as they ask? Now, when I ask people about this case, generally, a majority of people tend to think that there's something that isn't wrong in this case, where there was something wrong in the previous case. And we might also say it's harder to express a grievance on behalf of the deaf child in this second case, right? In the first case, where the child becomes deaf because the mother took a drug during pregnancy, it makes sense for the child to say, "Damn it, Mom, why did you make me deaf?" Right? But it seems like in the second case, the child might say, they can't quite say, "Damn it, Mom, you made me deaf," right? They might say, "I really don't get why you made me instead of a hearing child." Maybe some people would say that. But they're not going to be able to say, "You hurt me by bringing me into existence," rather than bringing another hypothetical hearing child into existence. So we call this an identity-affecting action, because the choice affects who comes into existence, right? If a different choice is made here, the baby that results will not be the same individual. In the first case, however, if the parents had not taken the drug, we would still have the same individual. It's just that in this case, they would not be deaf. So that's an identity-preserving action. No matter what you choose, the same individual will be born. But in these other cases, we have an identity-affecting action. That is, what you choose ends up affecting who was born. So it affects the identity of sort of the cast of characters in the situation. So we can think about these sorts of situations as in the second case of choosing the deaf embryo. We can call these non-identity cases, right? This is a case where a person would never have existed at all in the absence of some act. So some examples would be giving a couple IVF treatment. That is, by bringing baby B into existence instead of baby D, we are clearly performing a non-identity case because we're saying, like, look, we're getting baby B instead of baby D, right? By selecting the congenitally deaf embryo, we are getting a different individual than we would have gotten if we'd chosen the other one. And this actually goes beyond simply cases of reproductive technology and fertility cases. Dunn and Hope also give the example of a woman who decides to wait until age 39, at age 35, to have a child. She might think that she needs to get her education and career in order first, and then she's going to have a kid. Well, by waiting, a different egg is going to be fertilized, and a different sperm will fertilize that egg. And in this way, we're going to say that's even beyond fertility cases. We can also talk about history-altering events. A fact about my life is that my Canadian grandfather met my British grandmother during the Second World War. And there's no chance that my grandfather, who was not rich and did not have access to travel, there's no way he would have gone to Europe and met my grandmother had the war not happened. And to a certain extent, random chances happen, right? The smallest change in scenarios might make a difference to which of many, many million sperm is going to fertilize an egg. So we might say that these are cases where decisions are made, and the decisions that are made affect the identities of who gets to come into existence rather than some alternative people. Well, this leads us to the non-identity problem that I mentioned at the start of this video. This is a problem made famous by this philosopher right here, Derek Parfit. And we can think about it like this. It's a puzzle about how certain philosophical intuitions fit together. It seems plausible to a lot of people that an act can be wrong if it's bad for somebody. Oftentimes, people will defend their behavior by saying, I'm not harming anybody with what I do. Right? Some people think also that some actions, though flawed, can bring a person into existence, although the person who's brought into existence can still have a life worth living. So the people who object to choosing the deaf embryo might make a claim like this. They might say, even though this deaf person who grows up will have a life worth living, the parents still made a mistake by choosing a deaf embryo rather than a non-potentially deaf embryo. And in the same vein, there's an intuition that many people have that acts that bring a person into existence can be wrong. But notice that the embryo born who the embryo who develops into a person has a harder time making a moral criticism of somebody who brought them into existence. You can't do somebody a favor by not bringing them into existence at all. So these intuitions, what we notice when we consider them in conjunction is that you can't believe all three of these things and give a good answer to non-identity cases. And I will point out, it seems like most philosophers are willing to give up statement one, that an act can be wrong only if it's bad for somebody. That maybe there are cases where it's problematic to bring somebody into existence, but although it's problematic to bring them into existence, we're not harming them, right? So we have morally wrong actions, although nobody in the scenario is made worse off by the action. Now, one thing that this might lead us to is a utilitarian analysis, where we don't consider who exists, but we just consider the sum total of happiness over unhappiness. Now, that leads us to certain philosophical problems. But Dunn and Hope also seem to be flirting with letting go of maybe point 2 or point 3, because they're going to say it's hard to criticize somebody for bringing an individual into existence so long as their existence is going to be good enough. In that case, we might say that there is no harm to anyone in these non-identity cases, which might lead us to rejecting the claim that there's a flaw in situations where we bring somebody into existence. So what we notice with the non-identity problem is that we can get ourselves tied into knots when we start thinking about the well-being of future people, because what actions we take will actually affect which future people get to come into existence rather than not. So just to return to the cases, Dunn and Hope seem to be suggesting that it does not make sense to say that we benefit a child by not letting his mother conceive them. So in this way, in the case of the 59-year-old potential mother, it seems like even though people were quick to criticize her, Dunn and Hope say it's hard to see what was actually wrong with her action. Even if these children might be made fun of, or even if they might, witness the death of a parent younger in their lives than they'd otherwise be expected to be, it's hardly worth thinking that those two considerations would make their lives not worth living. And for another matter, we might have very little idea of the other social supports these children might have. And in this way, we're going to say we should reasonably think that these children will have lives worth living. And in that case, even if their lives might be harder, there's still nothing wrong with bringing them into existence. In a similar way, when we consider the case of selecting the deaf embryo, we might say there is no mistake in bringing those deaf embryos into existence. The broader point, where we return back to grafting adoption policies onto assisted reproduction policies, is that it doesn't make as much sense. Because adoption policies are about figuring out where we're going to allocate currently existing children, whereas IVF policies are going to be about identity-affecting actions. So instead of asking the question, who is the best possible candidate to parent the child, we should ask the question, which potential parents would give a potential future child a future that's good enough, rather than best. So, I hope that in this video we've gotten across that When we start thinking about the interests of future people rather than existent people, we might have to do some philosophical rethinking. We should also note that there are many other ethical questions that emerge in the context of IVF, whether that be fetal personhood or embryonic personhood that some people believe in. We might also consider how much money IVF costs people. How much access should a less wealthy couple get to IVF treatments? Should it be considered a luxury? We might also consider questions about disputes. What happens when there's a dispute between potential parents and a surrogate mother? Or a dispute between a couple that creates an embryo, freezes it, and gets divorced? What if one member of the couple wants to destroy the embryos and the other wants to gestate them? This raises large, interesting, and important challenges. So I hope that in this video we've just scratched the surface of one important philosophical question that emerges in the context of IVF. So we've looked at Dunn and Hope. I've also pulled some information about the non-identity problem from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Thank you for listening and learning. Take care.